Welcome to another episode of Capacity. Today we have Jonathon Friedl from Black Mountain. We're going to let him introduce himself. He speaks about his company extremely well and with a lot of passion. Tell us about your company.
So my name is Jonathon Friedl. I founded Black Mountain Manufacturing, which has recently become Black Mountain Aerospace and Black Mountain Manufacturing. One's an aerospace machining company, and the other is general CNC machining, sheet metal and fabrication shop that services the automation and robotics industries. We started back in 2017, and now we're here. In the beginning, I was just absolutely fascinated with the process of CNC machining. And I think a lot of young people get into the business that way because they're fascinated with this technology that they find on the internet. For me, I just stumbled across videos on YouTube where a tool is kind of dancing around a material and removing it. And the tool paths were really unconventional. And, you know, it's a 5-axis machine. So like things are spinning around. And I remember watching those videos and thinking like, this is a remarkable technology. How did I not know this existed? And at that point in my life, like I was on track to become a doctor, studying to get into med school, just in a completely unrelated direction in my life. And I found those videos and I was so fascinated by them. And then I ended up buying a used CNC machine because I just like had to have one.
How do you make that jump? Like even a used CNC machine isn't cheap for a person studying to be a doctor, right? Like that, how did your brain evolve from interest to gotta have it? How long did that take? What did it feel like?
Yeah, I was like binge watching CNC videos for about a year. And then I started looking at them for sale online. And a new machine, even back then, was like $150,000 to $200,000 for a good, brand new 3-axis mill. But the further you go back in time, the cheaper the machines get on the used market. And I found like literally a 1960s Bridgeport. It was on eBay and the guy wanted $2,000. And I, just on a whim, I sent him an offer for half the price and the guy accepted. And my brother-in-law and I, who like he and I have like run together for years, working in Alaska together on fishing boats or in canneries as welders, or doing power plant shutdowns where we're crawling around the inside of something called an economizer, cutting out boiler tubes and welding boiler tubes. Him and I had been partners in one context or another for years, and we just decided to go buy this machine. So we hop in his 6-cylinder Toyota half-ton pickup truck, tiny little truck, and we drive from Indianapolis to, I want to say Buffalo, New York. And we get to this ratty little sheet metal shop that's being run by this one guy who has this like inexplicably gorgeous personal assistant. And it's just like him and this personal assistant doing his books. And he's making parts. And he's like, there's the machine. Get it out of here by the end of the day. Best of luck. Like, we didn't know how to move a machine. We didn't know how heavy the machine was. We thought we could like scoot it across the floor with crowbars. And it took us a day to figure out a strategy, like just to move the machine across this floor and get it onto the back of this trailer. That was an adventure.
Any part of that journey that had you doubt, or your brother-in-law? Like, how did you convince, you were studying to be a doctor and he's like, oh, you're engaged to marry my sister and I'm going to go drive to Buffalo with you to figure out how to move a multi-ton machine that I've never even heard of before. Why? How did you convince him to do that?
Oh, the insanity had set in years ago, right? Yeah, I guess I tell the story like I was this very well put together, focused person with direction. But even up to that point, I was, my attention was split across so many different focuses and hobbies, but they all revolved around building things. When I went to buy that machine, by that time, I had a hobby sheet metal shop in my bedroom in his house. Because I was living in his house in Indianapolis. And even before I bought the CNC machine, I had a Miller welder beside the bed in my bedroom, and I had ripped up the carpet, and I had an English wheel, and I was building cafe racers. So I had like motorcycles taken apart in my bedroom in his house near downtown Indianapolis, building cafe racers, and supposed to be studying to get into med school. Never got in. Can't imagine why.
But you made some cool motorcycles.
Dude, I made some sick motorcycles. I just sold the last one a few months ago. They kind of followed me over the years. Like just working sheet metal, forming tanks.
What was he doing at the time as his like main gig?
He was between careers, I would say. He did a little bit of college here and there. Did not graduate. He went to Alaska with me to work on fishing boats. He was like a welder, like I was saying. And the type of welding we were doing, you would work for 8 to 10 weeks at a time in something like a power plant, where they will shut down for that period of time. And the downtime costs them so much money that they'll run 2 shifts back to back, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the opportunity to make a ton of money and work for a chunk of time and take a chunk of time off exists. And that was the lifestyle we were living. He was doing that with me. We would make a bunch of money. I would come back and I would go to college for a bit. He would just bum around his house and build things. He was making motorcycles with me at the time too. We had like a powder coating oven in his living room, sandblasting booth in the basement. The sheet metal shop with an English wheel and a shrinker stretcher and the welder was in my bedroom. His house was like this magical workshop. Like this one time I just decided like I wanted to build a wing for an airplane for $100 using only supplies that I got at Home Depot. So like we went to Home Depot and we were like walking down the aisles of Home Depot doing the engineering for this wing. Like we could use this material, we could use that material, we could shape this way and bend that way and use this like special kind of tape. So we bought like $100 worth of shit and we went home, and in his living room we built this airplane wing, and then we strapped the wing to his Toyota and ran it down this airplane runway until the wing flew off the back of his truck. Like that was our life. Like we just like experimented.
And this CNC machine purchase, is that how you would milestone the creation of what would become the business? Or were there a bunch of other steps in between?
I didn't think about the machine in an entrepreneurial context. That was more my second CNC machine that I bought. But the first machine was more of an experimental project. It wouldn't run in its current configuration because it was designed to use, and this is very common for old machines, designed to use tape with holes punched in the tape. Think of like a cassette tapes. You know, you'd make like a mixtape and you'd have this magnetic strip and 2 wheels. That's kind of how old CNC machines used to run, except instead of a magnetic strip, you would have a piece of paper with holes punched in it. And as that piece of paper would run through the machine would read the holes and execute moves based on the configuration of the holes.
Old punch cards.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So this machine had that operating system, but I had researched online enough to know that you can rip out the guts and do something called retrofit the machine. You basically throw a Windows computer in it, you download a control system, you buy some boards, you hook everything up, you wire everything together, and voila, you have a much more modernized control system. And I did that. I took this 1969, I want to say, Bridgeport, and put it in his backyard because my idiotic plan of breaking the machine down in pieces and packing it down the stairs in his basement was a fool's dream. So we left it in the backyard and we built this giant foam hut. Same foam we used to build the airplane wing I mentioned earlier. We built this foam hut around this machine in his backyard and I retrofitted it there. And in the process, I learned a lot about control systems. I started learning about G code. I, got my hands on a seat of Mastercam, and I started to learn about generating cam. That machine was this, I don't know, it just cemented this passion of mine over time. And I started making parts on it. And then got into a master's program at IU Medicine, and I was studying for my master's. And while I was studying for my master's, I was building AR-15 receivers with this machine, learning how to program, designing other projects. It was like that was this hobby that slowly like took over my life. Yeah, and then at some point, after my master's program, I got that third rejection letter from IU Medicine, and by that time, I had this garage full of equipment that included a CNC machine. And I had to make money because my wife, we'd had our first daughter by that time. And so I thought, I learned how to weld when I was a kid. I've heard that pipe welding pays really well. I'm going to get a pipe welding job, and that's how I'm going to make money. That's how I'm going to pay off student loan debt. That's how I'm going to make sure my family eats. So I started doing that. I got a pipe welding job, worked in power plant shutdowns, and over the course of, I want to say it was a year, like I grew my earning potential as an employee from something like $26 an hour to 200 to 250,000 a year. Like I was making as much as a general practitioner within a year using welding. I was like running a machine out of the back of my truck. Like there's like different subcategories of welding that pay more and more the more specialized you get. And the one that everybody thinks of that pays really well is like an underwater welder, which is not actually accurate. You make more money as a pipeline welder with a truck and like a gas-powered machine that sits in the back of that truck, and you do pipelines or you help build oil field locations, but it all centers around energy. So I ended up doing that in Pennsylvania and Ohio. And then I heard about work in Colorado that paid really well. And by that time, like I'm making like $85, $90 an hour, and you get paid for drive time, and just this magical job for somebody with a ton of energy and the willingness to work, as many hours in a week as are available. So I came out to Colorado because there was an oil patch there where I had heard of this guy that was hiring, and I called him up. And that's the thing you do in welding, right? You hear about jobs that are about to kick off, and you get numbers from people, and you call these people and you're like, hey man, let me on your job. Like I do this kind of welding, I'm pretty good. Give me a shot. Let me on your job. And then they schedule a weld test, and you show up and you take a weld test, whatever the test may be. Sometimes it's 2 flat pieces of metal. Sometimes it's like, for pipeline welding, they call it a butt and a branch, where you take 2 12-inch pieces of pipe and you make what is essentially a T with them. And you form the pipe with a torch, or you cut the pipe with your welding torch that's on the back of your truck, and then you stitch it together and weld it out. And then they cut strips out of that, and they bend it, and they see how it bent, and they look for imperfections in where the bends broke. And that's your welding test. And it's actually really hard. People practice for years to get to the point where they can pass a butt and a branch, because that welding test is what stands between you and a job where you make $250,000 a year. So I called this guy. I don't remember what I told him, but I must have made an impression, because he scheduled a test for me. So my wife and I are living out of short-term rentals in Pennsylvania and Ohio, miserably cold winters. And we pack up into my truck, like her, our daughter, literally everything we own in this truck. And we drive to Colorado, and we crash in my buddy's house. And his house is in the mountains west of Denver. And the mountain we were on was Black Mountain. The reason I say that is like that's what I ended up naming my company after that mountain, because I thought it was a cool name. And I take this welding test. We crash on my buddy's couch. I pass the test. I get the job. My wife and I get a temporary rental. I lose the job like a month later because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like faking it till I make it, you know? Like if somebody came to my shop and did that, I'd be so pissed off. One of those things you learn in retrospect, I suppose, as an entrepreneur, that maybe that is not the best way to do things. So anyway, I got that job and lost the job, and then I found another job, and it was just this iterative process where I would get a job, learn as much as I can, and then move on to the next job. And I got to the point where I was pretty good, and I had disposable income, and I had like two big projects in my life. Like I was building this rally car out of a BMW E30, and I had rented a shop in downtown Greeley, like 600 square foot plywood space. And by then I had bought another CNC machine and retrofitted it, a much nicer Japanese machine. And 2015 comes around and the price of oil just crashes like hard. And everybody shut down. It wasn't overnight, but it was fast. And I lost my job. I had this tiny little shop. My wife and I were so broke. And by that time, I had worked enough in enough different industries to know that it wasn't so much a question of me finding the right fit in terms of what I was passionate about and what industry I wanted to be in or what job I wanted to do. It was a question of me just not being a good employee. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. This slow moving worm of an idea just buried itself in my head, and I've never been able to get it out. I've been fired from something like 40 to 60% of the jobs I've ever had, because I'll get on a job, I'll get really bored. When somebody stops growing or they get bored at a job, like they're like instantaneously a bad fit. It's like a universal human trait. Like you hire somebody and they learn everything they're going to learn at your organization. They reach that ceiling and they just look around and it's the same old shit every day and they've got to go. And that was me, like at pretty much every job I ever had. Anyway, 2015 oil crashes. I realized that I have to be an entrepreneur to succeed in life. I convinced my brother-in-law, who has spent the majority of his young adulthood following me into one insane idea after another, from commercial fishing in Alaska, which is just a bonkers job, by the way, to welding in power plants, which is another very unconventional, very bust-ass job that the majority of people, like, one, they don't know about, two, they couldn't muster the energy to do. I convinced this guy who's more or less my best friend to start this business with me. And it was going to be a product-based company called the Black Mountain Manufacturing. And we designed this CNC machined bottle cap that would screw on to like a Coke bottle or water bottle. And then we launched it on Kickstarter. We were going to be a product-based company. We were going to be a brand, you know, because I thought that was sexy and that's what I wanted to do. And it was mildly successful, but I didn't anticipate the amount of energy that would have to go into the production of it. And I also didn't realize that, or maybe I did realize, but I just ignored it because I wanted to execute on the project so badly. But it never had the legs to carry us as a company. We would have had to do, 5 to 10 projects on that scale to be a viable company. Anyway, launched this thing on Kickstarter, sold thousands of them all over the world, spent months building them. made just enough money to pay rent for that month, and realized like we could not be a product-based company running 1980s Japanese machines that were retrofit. They just weren't fast enough. They weren't scalable. Like the whole model just was not scalable. 6 months later, like we are living in a camper next to our shop. And at this point, I'm working 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this went on for a year and a half of us taking like job shop work and a little bit of like oil field gigs. So a year and a half in this camper.
How'd you go from having this bottle cap idea to being able to find job shop work and being motivated to work so many hours every day, 7 days a week for so long?
The transition from being a product-based company to doing job shop work was a very slow and painful one. And it was a lot of word of mouth. I would tell my story to people and they would say, you should talk to this guy. He might have work for you. You know, we would get down to almost nothing and then a job would come in the door and we would do that job and we'd be able to keep the lights on for another few months. Very, very slow, painful process in the very beginning. But there were a few very, very pivotal moments where it was either me going to get a job working a shutdown somewhere at a power plant as a W-2 employee or getting work in the door. And it seemed like we would always get a job at the last second. This is a story my wife and I always reflect on, and we think like, this was God working in our life. You know, this is just like too fortuitous to be happenstance. I was driving down the highway at one of those times in my life where I had no money and I had to go get a job. And I had realized this business idea that I had, being a job shop, was not sustainable. So I'm in my welding truck driving down the highway and I see an oil location where they were, we call it a pad. It's essentially where a rig shows up and they do like a horizontal drilling. And then once the oil comes out of the ground, it just doesn't go into a truck. It gets like semi-processed on site. You know, it goes into separators. They pull the sand out. They pull the water out from the fracking. And then they put the oil in a tank. And that is called a tank battery. And that's what I spent the majority of my oil field career building with my truck. I'm driving down the road and I see this pad that I'd never seen before. And I pull off and I drive on a location. And it just so happened that the owner of the construction company that was building that pad was there. And I handed him my card and I said, I've got a shop. I would like to work for you if you have work for me. And he was such a quiet guy. And he just looked at me and he was like, okay, you have a shop? Great. Shook my hand. His name is Bill Munt, an amazing guy. I hop in my truck and I leave. Didn't hear from him. I get a weld test scheduled in New Orleans. And my wife has a third the day before I was supposed to leave. She was due like a week into the job, but she really wanted to have the baby when I was there. So she like did a bunch of things to put herself in labor. She's such a boss. We have 6 kids now, by the way. Such a boss, like goes through the process of labor and has this baby while I'm home. I hold the baby. We spend like a night together and then I hop in my truck and I head off to New Orleans. And halfway to New Orleans, we get a phone call from Bill Munt and he's got this massive oil field job that we can do in our shop. And I turn around. I'm in Texas and I drive all the way back to Colorado and we do this job. So I think most shops go through that process, that up and down, feast or famine, coming close to the end and then something just happens to work out. That was an example of that for me.
And your brother-in-law is working with you this whole time.
Yeah. Oh, and he's incredibly instrumental. He has the superpowers that I don't have that are very complementary to me. His superpower is to get people to open up. He will meet someone and in the first half an hour, they will be just vomiting their entire life story and all their problems onto him. And he's just sitting there listening. And he walks away retaining most, or if not all of it. And he can pick out the opportunities in that story for our company. if it weren't for that superpower, our company would not exist today. Because not long after that, we got to a point where the shop could not sustain the two of us, and one of us had to leave and go get a job. So Isaac left and got a job in the oil field with this guy, Bill Munt, as a contractor. And he's in the oil field, on location, as they call it, watching how this tank battery is being built. And he notices that the gas company is using a polymer pipeline in between the oil heads and the separators. It's kind of a cheaper way of doing things, right? You have kind of a hard metal pipe that comes out of the ground, and then you have this coupling that transitions the pipe from steel or stainless to polymer. And then you snake a polymer line through the ditch, and you avoid welding, and you can lay it in a day or two. They're using this polymer line in conjunction with these stainless couplings, and the couplings take a crew of guys hours to install. One end of it gets welded to a pipe, and on the other end of it, there's a series of sleeves that the polymer line fits inside, kind of an internal diameter sleeve and an outer diameter sleeve. And then to fully install the coupling, you force that coupling through a mandrel, and it crushes the outer sleeve onto the polymer line, squishing the polymer line between the inner and the outer coupling or sleeve. So these couplings are just a project management nightmare. It takes 5 guys in this giant gasoline-powered machine that has to be moved with a heavy piece of equipment from one end of the ditch to the other. And he just thought, like, that coupling is garbage. I feel like we could do a better job. And he's coming home every day and he's telling me about these problems. And I'm like, it sounds like we could build a better coupling. You have a lathe. We're smart. We could engineer something. One of the most pivotal moments, arguably the most in our entire business history, was the moment when he walked, in a figurative sense, around the person he was working for and had a conversation with the gas company directly. He walks up to the company man and he's like, "We can build you a better coupling. I have a machine shop. We can weld all your stainless too." And at that time, he was bringing home stainless welding and doing it in our shop for Bill Munt, and then taking it back out to location. So we were kind of already doing the stainless portion of the welding on site. And the company man looks at him, and he looks at his 1959 welding truck that everyone loved. And he says, "Okay, I want you to build me a coupling. And by the way, you're going to weld stainless directly for me moving forward." And like the flip of a switch, we went from being nobody to having what they call a master service agreement with a gas company. It's a very coveted situation to have in that, like, my neck of the woods in my industry. We had an MSA with a gas company in a few weeks, and we were welding stainless for them. And we started designing this stainless steel coupling. And it was this really cool iterative process. We would design a coupling, and we would, put 2 couplings on either end of a polymer line, and we would pressure it up with a hand jack, fill it with water, and then basically just hook like a hand pump hydraulic thing up to it. We'd have a gauge, and the thing would burst, and we'd go back to the drawing board and build another one. And it took like a month, and we came up with this badass coupling design. And it wasn't just the coupling either. We had the coupling, and then we also had this, the tool to install it. Instead of being a gasoline-powered machine that took a piece of equipment to move, I had built a hand-operated, very, very small tool that would install a coupling that could be operated by like a single dude. Like one guy, instead of 5 guys, using this one tool that he could carry around himself, could install a coupling. And we started building these couplings for the gas company. And then the company that made the polymer line, who was building this terrible design, got wind that the gas company was no longer buying their coupling and they were buying ours. And they started snooping around, and then their attorneys got involved and despite the fact that we had filed for a provisional patent on this coupling, once their attorneys got involved, we more or less got a cease and desist from the gas company. They called us and literally told us to bury all of it. So we did. But the gas company was so gracious and grateful that we had built this solution for them that they started giving us more work. Third year in business, we did 5.2 million in sales. It was insane. I was not prepared to handle a company with 36 people. Neither was my business partner. We were learning all the hard mistakes.
So did it work? Were you able to control the chaos and create the structure and manage the 36 people? And
Oh, no. No. I think the main one was our company was split on between two fronts, we'll say. One was the oil field side, where we managed the majority, like the vast majority of our revenue was generated by construction workers, essentially on site building these tank batteries, crews of welders, more or less, welders and helpers. Ultimately, we only had one big oil field client. We didn't put energy into sales. We kind of just rode that one opportunity out. And when COVID happened in 2019, oil went through this another like small little crash, and that company got bought out by another company, and we got washed out of the vendor pool. So like oil field side of our company overnight gone.
And like you said, the vast majority of your revenue.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like 70% of it. Just like overnight gone. Like the most profound existential crisis I've ever gone through. Like 2019 to 2020. Same for Isaac too. It was a very stressful time. He, at that stage, was like, you know what? We have failed miserably. We need to move on with our lives. And his wife felt the same way. Probably the second most pivotal moment in our business was when he said, no, I think I need to leave now. And I think you can have it. And he, at that moment, I mean, he could have fought me and he could have forced me to break the company apart and sell it all and probably walked away with some money. But he just handed me the keys to his half of the company. We were 50-50. And we're like still best friends to this day. Like that's how amazing he is as a human being.
How did that moment feel for you?
I was so emotional, man. This is like at a point in my business where I think every entrepreneur goes through this, but nobody talks about it except for a handful of few. Like I would wake up at 2 a.m. and pace my backyard in tears because I thought my life's work was going to evaporate. Or like, fuck, I'm alone now. Like it's just me. And I've been riding the coattails of his superpower to get to here. Now I have to figure out how to do this on my own. I just had the sense that there's a strong possibility that I would fail. It's very difficult emotionally, but you push through, you rebuild, you can do anything when your life is on the line. And at that point in my life, I was like, my entire future is riding on this, and I don't have the option to fail.
So you're on your own now.
Mm-hmm.
You are focused on the fabrication and CNC. You lost your biggest customer. What's worked and what hasn't?
When you have to make an instantaneous pivot, you don't have time to evolve as an organization. Everyone needs to, on the balls of their feet, shift direction and move. And in those moments, you need to be able to look your team in the eye and say, guys, I don't have time to explain, but everyone go that direction right now. I will explain to you what we're doing when we get there. There are times in an organization where you have to do that. And that's when typically I leverage like that type of management style. And it's important as a leader in an organization to recognize when that is appropriate and when it's not appropriate. Like 90% of the time, you need to be leading the other style where it's like you're empowering your people. You give them a lot of freedom. You make sure you keep everyone at the organization inspired to execute the vision. And then there are times when you as the leader of that organization are looking around corners and you're seeing dangers or opportunities that require very quick execution, and you have to get your team to move right then and there. This entire podcast is in the context of software and the impact that software can have on your business. And I am standard deviations above the norm in terms of my passion for good software, to the point where, if I could do it all over again, I wouldn't start a manufacturing company. I would focus on software, because that's when I wake up in the morning and think about what's going to really empower my business, but not what's going to really empower my business, but what is going to change the world, what's going to have the greatest impact. It's software. People have been building things for centuries, in some cases, in terms of the technology that we leverage. The shear has been around since the Civil War. Long before that. I toured this steel plant and they had equipment that dated back to the Civil War, literally, for shearing metal. But I say that in the context of the real changes that have happened in manufacturing have all been digital, in a sense, in one way or another. Motion control systems that drive CNC machines and lasers, and the technology that you leverage to generate a laser.
I would say that you are a software company. You have engineers that take drawings and turn them into code. That code is executed on machines that you retrofitted on old things that you bought, or you bought them new with new controllers. You just sit at the boundary limit of atoms and bits. You take bits and you move atoms with it. You are software in its most physically useful form.
That's an interesting way of putting it. When I think of a software company, I think of a company that's generating software, that's building a new idea, executing fresh code, in a sense. And that, to me, the thing that's going to change the world in manufacturing, the thing that will really have the most profound impact, is software, especially in the United States. Overseas, their competitive advantage is the fact that everybody's dirt poor and they'll work for $1 a day. And you can't compete with that. Even when you take into account the cost to move, thousands of tons worth of ship from one port to another, you still can't compete with the fact that people will work for damn near free in China, right? So we have to think of other ways that we can be competitive in the United States, because barring, a massive economic crash, people aren't going to work for pennies here. So you have to think of better ways to be more competitive. And you can't think that buying a better machine is going to do that for you, because ultimately people in China can buy the same machine that you can buy from Switzerland or Germany, or wherever it is. We're all leveraging the same technology. It's been commoditized. You have to think of a better way of managing it. You have to innovate in a different way. And I think that innovation is going to happen with software. One of the companies right now that really inspires me is Hadrian. The CEO, Chris Power, has this vision where he will have an aerospace manufacturing company that leverages software to automate every step of the process, whether it's, and this is the conventional understanding of automation, a robotic arm that will move raw material into a CNC machine. And on the other end of the spectrum, the less conventional understanding of automation is software that will automate the high-level decision-making, software that will interface with the customer, software that will program the CNC machine. And you just minimize the number of people that you have at your organization that are executing the tasks that people in China will do for free. Because if you can eliminate that $2 an hour guy, then you're more competitive than China.
Yeah, internally we talk about it more about a moment in time. As in this moment in time, we have worked on the mechanical muscles of our business. CNC machines are essentially mechanical muscles, right? These robot arms are mechanical muscles. We've automated away the muscle mass that's on the shop floor, moving stuff around. It's reduced injuries, it's increased throughput. But it's been decades since we've really made any advancements in the mechanical mind. And those are the decision-making processes. And that's now the bottleneck. The constraint for most businesses isn't material movement, it's decisions. It's what to buy when, who to build for what, at what price, when to build it on what machine to buy, when to buy it, how to set it up, how to organize your shop, how to measure the results, how to have telemetry to understand what's going on. The mechanical mind really hasn't had much innovation for 30 years. And it's, in that 30 years, an enormous amount of progress has been made on the mechanical muscles. We've added axes to CNC machines. We've added wattage to lasers. We've added precision. We have fiber lasers now that can move and swivel and pivot. We have press brakes that have tooling that can automatically change and coordinate with the drawings that you have on the laser from before. Like, an enormous amount of mechanical muscle innovation has happened over 30 years. And what we see is, in this moment, the best way we can improve manufacturing is to help automate the mechanical mind.
I'm really curious, from your perspective, what impact do you see AI having on manufacturing? Like, what is the pinnacle of the impact that AI could have on somebody like me? Like, imagine a perfect world where somebody came along and leveraged that technology to its ultimate potential.
Well, I believe that manufacturing in the world, but more specifically in America and in the places that we've exported our methodologies, so Japan, Germany, France, lots of different countries, that manufacturing works as a network. It's kind of like the internet in certain ways. You don't fabricate the entire assembled thing, mostly. Maybe sometimes you have. But you're fabricating an outer shell, maybe a gear component, or maybe some valve or something. Somebody else is powder coating it. Somebody else is making the PC boards to control it. Somebody else is doing the injection molding to create the housing between the metal components so they don't rub up against each other, whatever it may be. There's a bunch of specialization, smaller companies that are doing a bunch of different things. And if you study manufacturing, it is already a network. It's just an analog network. You communicate through emails, sometimes faxes, unfortunately. But the drawing and the instructions are the medium of communication. So in the internet, little packets of information that we break down are the medium that we throw around. Drawings and revisions, those are the packets that drive manufacturing. And then the components too flow around and get assembled together. Your engineers and the designers and engineers at your customers, you guys are the relays. You're the components that send and receive that information. You got to receive it and digest it. And this network is slow. It's slow because humans have to send and receive this information. They don't just have to govern it and direct it. They have to actually digest it. And there's miscommunication. How many times have you received something, thought that you understood what they wanted you to build, built it, and it wasn't what they wanted? How many times have they asked you for something, thinking that they asked it very clearly, and it was extremely vague? It's a very, very imperfect network. Imagine if you hit a website online and it was just a randomly different website sometimes that fit the description. That's really how the manufacturing network is. For me, the biggest potential of AI is automating the switching of information between manufacturing businesses. That an artificial intelligence agent can handle that communication. So your engineers, they still are extremely valuable, but they're actually figuring out how to build it, not figuring out how to communicate it. And now these drawings and all this information can switch through this network, and the speed of movement is really just limited by machines and shipping. We're not even close to that. Shipping and machines are really not the constraint for manufacturing. It's this communication and communication architecture. So for me, AI has a hope of becoming a utility that allows for this vision of a network of manufacturing to emerge. Without it, it's so painful to automate anything in terms of communication between them. But that's where I see a really exciting potential future coming in applying the technology of more modern AI to manufacturing.
This to me is like super fascinating for a number of reasons, right? When I onboard a software company, I don't look at the product as much as I look at what the ethos of the company is and where they're going and how far they're going to get, right? Like, you tell me your options meets the basic minimum requirements that I have, and your team did that in the very beginning. And they did that in a conversation that was prefaced by my very bad experience with an ERP system. So it was a very direct, you better do what you say you're going to do conversation. But I wasn't so much looking for a software company that could meet those requirements as I was looking for somebody with a very clear vision of a better future. And you had that. Your team had that from day one. It wasn't so much, this is what we're doing, as like, this is where we're going. Like, come be a part of it. Come be a part of the future. And that's what sold me on your company. That's why I became a Fulcrum customer. I didn't realize how much of an early adopter I was. I think back in those days, like, you were getting a new customer once every what?
Quarter.
Like, I was like a 1 and a 3 month experience. And I just picked up the phone. I called you. I was like, can you do this? Who are you? Tell me about your company. All right. You sound like a great fit. I'm wiring you money, And like, that was that. And we've been like a rabid fan ever since. There's two software companies that we have partnered with that really have strongly impacted and facilitated our success over the last 3-4 years. One is Paperless Parts and the other is Fulcrum. Both of those companies are amazing and have had a tremendous impact on my business. They have allowed me, as an owner entrepreneur, to step away from my business and truly build what to me is the holy grail of a manufacturing company, a company that runs itself, a company that I can hand off to somebody else, a company that's sellable, a company that my children could someday inherit. To me, that's the only type of company worth building, a company that you can sell.
Generational value. And so many guys starting out get this wrong in the early days. It's about technology. It's about revenue. It's about profit. And to me, it's about organizational health. It's about automation. It's about me being able to go to Puerto Rico with my daughter and pop open my laptop and know at a glance that my company is okay and in good hands. And Fulcrum and Paperless give me the tools to do that. Your software has had a very profound impact on my business, not just my business, but my life. It's given me a new way of thinking about building my company. Like, I didn't have that vision of the future where software automates everything in the early days. I started to get that and realized that that was the only way forward, the only kind of company I wanted to have. And I didn't think anybody made the tools to make it possible. And I hired a software developer, and she obviously couldn't execute the vision. She's just one person. If I were actually going to start a software company that built the kind of the end-to-end holy grail of what I wanted, it would have taken millions and a team of developers and an expertise that I didn't have the ability to leverage. So when I found Paperless and then I found Fulcrum, it was like I didn't have to do that anymore. I didn't have to build my own software. Like, there's a version of the future where I could just implement a SaaS product. And I didn't have to reinvent the wheel because, there was a tech company that was already doing it for me. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast and having a great conversation.
Yeah, you're welcome. This is a good conversation.